Kevin,
Uh,
how you doing?
so
Have I got you pulling your
for
hair out?
yeah, a bit. A little bit anecdotal. I like to say or think that's a problem for future Kevin. Like when I go to bed and think what I have to do on the next
Okay.
day, I like to think, yeah, that's a problem for future Kevin. I want to sleep now.
Okay.
So I'm not sure how much this plays into this, but I think it's kind of funny.
Well, I guess if I
Um,
if I were to go out and go heavy drinking, that's a future Matt that has to deal with the hangover. So
exactly.
to heck with that guy.
Another thing, and I again don't know how much this plays into this, is I had a course in computer vision, uh, computer science, and what they did is tracking ants and their movement, and they recorded the ant and stabilized the camera, and you can see in the video they have recorded and applied computer vision algorithms on that the algorithm uh, tracks the end. But the algorithm really doesn't care about A theory or B theory of time. It's just it recognizes that there is something moving and it recognizes that it's very similar to what it was before because it has memories or data from how it looked before. And then it identifies the end in the next frame with the end from the previous frame. Um, Again, I'm not sure how much this plays into this, but maybe it's just food for thought.
Sure. Yeah, I actually think that makes more sense in the A theory than the V. But since I don't know as much about computers, maybe there's. I guess that at best, what I think that would show is that we would be capable of describing a region of space and the contents within it relative to to some reference frame, and that certainly we could do. And so you could, for example, program it to capture the contents of this area of space, and then capture try to like locate something relatively close in the next frame. But actually, the computer has no idea what time is either, right? It
Yeah,
has an internal clock, but it doesn't actually perceive time. It's just data, and so it doesn't know what the ant is, and it doesn't know what objects are. It just knows what it's programmed to do. And so I think that at best that would give us that we're capable of describing in computer language how a computer would go about tracking very similar three-dimensional objects. But suppose the ant's stationary and not moving at all. You would still have the same problem because the computer doesn't know from one moment to the next or one set of objects. It doesn't have any idea about continuity of identity. So even if the A theory is true, I think you would still have like, well, why is it that the computer can identify the ant at this time with the ant at that time? And it just has to do with how we're describing things.
yeah. I think what I want to get at is how I described identity before. Like the computer just takes pictures and sees that there's similarities and just says, "Yeah, this is the end we were tracking before." So I think
Sure.
this tries to explain how I use identity in the B theory sense.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess what that would go back to, and that's kind of was my point earlier, right? Is that the B theory would rely on our perspectival view of the ant. So it would say like, well, look, your view of this ant moving around, that's just nothing but your just kind of your perspective based on your memories and whatnot. But it's actually not moving. Everything's timeless. But you just have this perception. But the perception is actually illusory. And then so that right. I mean that's what it would say is your perception of change is actually it's actually illusory. There's nothing that's really changing. That would be what the B theory would say. Correct.
Yeah, kinda, I guess. I think the states still in some way depend on each other. Like if you just take the usual linear function,
Oh,
in some way the states depend on each other from the previous, but also not really. So
right. But I guess what I'm just saying is like your perception of change, your perception of the ant moving around, for example, on the B theory would be illusory. It's not actually moving around. You're seeing an ant. You are seeing the ant, but your perception that the ant is moving around, for example, is illusory. It's not actually moving around on the B theory. Is that correct?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. So that's part A, I guess, is that you have this perception of the continuity of the ant and it moving around, but then in the B theory that's denied. But then when we go to the B theory and say like, well, how is this the same object? You end up saying, well, you can observe, you can perceive it to be the same object, but that's the same perception that B theory said was illusory. And so how can I have to rely on what I'm told is an illusory perception in order to get the continuity of the object so that I can then translate that into B theory language? And that's kind of what I was saying before was like B theory says we rely on our perception of the continuity of that object in order to say that, okay, yeah, there's Frank. And, going back to our example of the model in that royalty-free stock photo, we're relying on our perception of Frank to say, oh, yeah, okay, I understand what Frank is. And then I have to translate that into the B theory. But that perception of Frank is the very thing that the B theory says was illusory in the first place. Thank you for listening. If you found this helpful, please like and subscribe. Please also look at the show notes in order to find a link to our group so that you can join our next discussion. I look forward to chatting with you.